Hello YouTube. The name of the video I'm going to make today is going to be called How to Crush the Paulson Kan Every Single Time. So the Paulson Kan is actually a pretty solid opening. Pretty hard to crush actually, but I've probably played this particular game that I'm about to show you probably about 20 times, and I've crushed the Paulson Kan every single time. And I think it just has to do with the way people are learning openings now. They're learning openings kind of by rote, and they're not paying attention to what their opponent's moves are. And I think that's something that as a player, I think it's something that you can very easily take advantage of. You can figure out what setups people are choosing, and you can choose the setup that simply crushes that setup. And if they're not paying attention, they'll just get crushed really quickly. And like I said, I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with the Kan itself. I just think there's something very wrong with the way that the majority of people are playing it. And I'm going to show you this game, and I'm going to show you how you can just crush the Kan like almost every single game. It's just ridiculous. I've probably played this game 20 times. It's super easy. It's crazy. So e4, c5, knight f3, e6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, a6, bishop d3. So this is just the main line of the Paulson Kan. Queen c7, castles, knight f6, queen e2, simply threatens e5, so of course the normal move is d6. So now here d6, and white goes into the Marcosi bind with c4. Now here's the thing I want everybody to keep in mind. There are multiple setups for the Marcosi bind for white. And in those multiple setups, you should actually be deciding what you're going to be doing with the black pieces in every single one of these setups. And they might go to different squares. There's setups involving b3, bishop b2, f4. There's setups involving knight c3. There's setups involving, of course, knight d2. There's setups where this knight retreats. The two main setups really are like whether you put the bishop on e3 or b2. That's a huge decision point. And then another huge decision point is whether or not you're going to play on the queen side or whether or not you're going to play on the king side, or whether or not you're going to just kind of sit and then wait to see what you're going to do. So you can play b3 and f3, for example, and just kind of sit on your position. You can play f3 and then you can play a3 and b4 and expand on the queen side, or you can play b3 and f4 and expand on the king side. Now when I was a kid, I learned these setups. And I learned these basic strategies in the Marcosi bind because it's important. This hedgehog position comes up a lot. And I also learned that if you're playing the black pieces, you have to be ready to parry whichever side of the board white is choosing to attack on. So you can't just play this position in your sleep. Unfortunately, that's what a lot of players do here. They just play the next 7 or 8 moves in their sleep. They play knight on b to d7, which, I'll be honest, you don't really know if the knight belongs there yet. It might belong on c6. So here I'll play b3, and they play bishop e7. I've had so many people just play these moves by rote that I go for this setup. And white's got a lot of white's got more room here to be creative. White can choose his setup. White has more space, and there's no immediate threat to white position. So white can actually choose which setup he wants to employ while everybody's kind of setting up their pieces. And the setup I usually choose is the setup involving b3, bishop b2, and then bringing the rook to c1, and then bishop b1. And my idea is I'm going to play actually king h1 and f4 is the setup that I choose. But even here, I haven't fully committed to a setup yet. I have multiple threats. I can play knight d5, I can play b4 and c5 at some point. I can play f3 and secure the pawn and then play b4 and c5. Or I can play king h1 and f4. And black's position is still fine here. Black's position is still relatively flexible. But at this point, black needs to keep a very close eye on what white's doing, because his position can actually fall apart really quickly, especially if white takes one of the more aggressive plans. So rook fe8, I already think this is a bad move, because you're weakening the f7 square, and you're not really 100% sure if the rook belongs on e8. I would just play rook ac8 here. That seems much more reasonable. So king h1, and then I'll show you this first game. I had somebody just play the move queen b8 against me, and this is a move that a lot of people play, and I still don't get it. Maybe they think it's part of a setup. I've also had people, of course, play rook ac8 first, and then play queen b8, and then do the same thing. For starters, when I play king h1, I'm threatening to play f4, and I'm threatening to play e5. I'm just threatening to play in the middle of the board. And it makes sense because after f4, e5, the f7 square is weak. I'm actually just threatening to crush black right away. Your radar should be up right now that, hey, something's wrong, But I'll show you one example. So queen b8, And then I just follow through with just the most basic plan in the position, just f4. And I've actually had, like I said, like close to a dozen people play this move against me. Knight c5. And then basically, like, the game is just over. e5 just winning. And knight c5 is just horrible, by the way. If anything, you should be bringing this knight back to f8 just to try to hold your kingside together. So knight c5 gets played like a lot. And then e5 takes, knight d7. And of course, if you can see the win here, take a second, pause the video, see if you can find it. Okay, the move is bishop takes h7, king h7, queen h5, king g8, queen f7. This is very similar, just the Greek gift. And then after this, we play knight d5. Now this is actually an interesting move. There's a couple different moves here that win, actually. Knight d5 wins. I've played knight d5 before. And of course, the idea is I'm just creating inroads for my rooks. I'm going to play rook c3, rook h3, or I'm going to play rook f3. Rook h3. I just need to get the rook to the king. So knight d5 does the job. Another move that does the job is simply knight f5 apparently also works. An example would be like bishop f8, and then we play rook f4 is winning. If e takes f5, we play rook takes f5. So we get our inroad that way. And of course, we're threatening queen takes g7. So knight f5 also works. But knight d5 is winning, and then bishop takes d5. Rook c3. It's just forced mate. And like I said, I must have played this game a dozen times. This exact game. So, I mean, I don't want to pick on any one individual opponent because there were many. So, it's just a forced win here. But I'll show you the finish of one of my games here. Went like this. And black had to resign here. This was just ridiculous. So this would be the continuation. Black actually resigned after rook f6, so, but this would be the forced continuation, if you're curious, and that's mate. Okay, so the alternatives are interesting because I've had, like I said, I've had probably close to 20 games in this. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go back to one of the critical positions anyway after the move, king h1. Like I said, I've had some people play queen b8. I've had other people play rook ac8. After the move rook ac8 is a little bit better. I just play the same plan. I play f4. And then people a lot of times play queen b8 without even thinking. Now, of course, my rook is no longer on the same file as the queen, so I have no problem just moving it to support my e5 push. So I just move it over to e1. And it's the same plan. And now here, the best move for black is undoubtedly just knight f8. Just trying to hold together that king side. Now what's interesting here is I can still go crazy if I want to. There's still a great attacking try. I can still play e5, takes, knight ft7, and if I want to, I can just play an equal position and I can just try to improve my position slowly with a move like knight f3 and just hold my e5 pawn and just continue. But if I want to, this sacrifice is actually pretty unclear. Like rook takes f7 is a worthwhile idea, and the idea is after king f7, I'm going to play knight e6. This gets super interesting. It's actually not clear if this is unsound. And of course, the point is that you're disrupting the knight on f8. So, like for example, if they continue, well, knight takes e5 is an option, but if they continue with a move like knight e6, you have queen h5, which is again the same type of Greek gift sacrifice that we were trying before. And then you'd have some continuation like this, which this is kind of a crazy computer line. But at this point, you get a perpetual if they play king f8, so you have that going for you. And if they play king e7, you have a huge advantage after knight d5 check, unbelievably enough. And other continuations are equally unclear, as crazy as this looks. Like, the best line given by the computer actually ends with black eventually having to give up his queen, but having potentially a better position than white. It's really unclear. So like you could play knight takes e5 and then knight d5, and again you can't have that knight get disrupted on f8. So this position gets kind of wild. And you'd have something like this, and if you continue playing for a win with a move like king e7, again you could just play king e6. And, you know, after rook d1, you have no choice. You actually have to block with the queen. You're getting mated otherwise. So you would actually have to play queen d6 here, and then white could pick up that queen. And yeah, black is probably better here, but look at that king. That king is still extremely weak. So this is worthwhile. This is worth exploring. But at the same time, you just simply have that move earlier that I discussed. You don't have to sacrifice a whole rook. You can just play knight f3. But going back to what I was talking about, just how to crush this opening really quickly. After rook ac8, f4, queen b8, we have rook ae1, and then I've had a whole host of tries here that just totally lose. I've had bishop f8, which of course loses to the same idea. And actually here you'd have to sacrifice a whole piece because this knight on f6 actually has nowhere to go. Another move that I've had people play is just the move knight to c5. And after the move knight to c5, e5, takes, knight ft7, and this is pretty much the exact same thing. Just bishop takes h7, queen h5, and then this is actually a little bit easier because you've got two rooks that can already come, so you don't have to play the move knight d5. So knight f5 works really quickly, same principle. Rook takes f5 going to h5, and then you've got the other rook that can come in too. You've got rook e3 coming to h3, and that's a quick win. So this is just how to crush the Paulson Kan really, really quickly, because people just play this. They just play like this without looking at white's moves. And if you just take this most aggressive setup with b3, bishop b2, knight c3, king h1, f4, e5, then if they're not paying attention and they're just moving their pieces to squares that they think are normal, because they have ways to not get checkmated when you play this way. They can bring their knight back to f8, for example. They can deploy their knight to different squares, like they can put their knight on c6 instead of d7. They don't have to put their rook on e8. But a lot of people just play these openings by rote, and you can just get a huge position with white. So this is how to crush the Paulson Kan really, really quickly. I hope you learned something new about chess. Thank you very much for watching.